Hello. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. I'm Shaunna Adcox, Columbia's Assistant Bureau Chief, essentially lead State House reporter. I've been covering the State House for 16 years now, but today's topic is the departure of former USC President Bob Caslen and his roughly 2-year tenure. Andy Shain has been covering that from the beginning. He's actually been covering USC for long before he came to the Post and Courier. So I'll toss it to him to talk about himself and his background.
Hey, Shaunna, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And, I have been covering USC for well over a decade. I started covering actually the Gamecocks. I covered basketball and football basically at the beginning of the 2010s. So I was there for the height of the football team, as well as the last 2 years of Darren Horn on basketball. Then I moved over to the administration, covering the administration. This was all at the state newspaper, and I've covered really the other side of USC since 2012 for both the state newspaper and now the Post and Courier. So it's been an interesting ride.
Okay, so I see that Andy's already put in his Twitter handle and his email in the chat. So please, if you have any obviously, you can email him questions, but you can also put those questions in for today. We've got a lot of things to ask, so let's get started with a broad overview. Andy, what was behind Caslen's departure?
Sure. Bob Caslen came to USC in 2019 when, after Harris Pastides retired after 11 years. And so, it's been, Harris was a very popular president. He had been a president for almost twice as long as usually a college president usually lasts. So there was sort of a different direction that the board wanted to take. They wanted someone who was not necessarily coming from the academic world. They wanted someone who would look at sort of the bottom line, the business aspects of the school. And then Bob Caslen became available. He had retired from the Army as a 3-star general. And his last 5 years, he was the superintendent at West Point. So he came from college. So it was seen as sort of a win-win here, somebody who's not necessarily steeped in the traditional academic background that might make some of the tough calls that they wanted made, that the board thought needed to be made to help tighten the school financially. Bob's election has been well chronicled, but just to summarize it really quickly, he was one of 4 finalists. He was by far seen as the favorite among the finalists. In fact, because he had been sort of talked about as a favorite, some other folks had dropped out of the running, knowing that they weren't going to get the job. So essentially, it was he and 3 other folks who had more traditional academic backgrounds, including Bill Tate, the current provost at USC. When it came time to vote, because of concerns that were raised on the board and concerns raised with students and faculty about Bob's background, sort of the lack of a traditional academic background, the board at first didn't vote for any of them. And then Henry McMaster lobbied the trustees on behalf of Caslen. And the next thing we know, we had a vote for Caslen just to see if he would be president. Very divided board, which normally is very united. Pat Caslen is named the new president by an 11-8 vote. Protests outside, a lot of folks upset. But then when he got into office, he did some things to kind of calm things down. He got the first raises for faculty in well over a decade. He, worked to connect with students. He worked obviously to make sure things were going well with athletics. And then all of a sudden COVID came. And, a lot of people have said, who better to have at USC when COVID came than a 43-year Army veteran? Obviously, we can talk obviously about things that went right or wrong during COVID, but generally, Bob Caslen received good marks for how things went with COVID. They closed the campus in the spring, reopened it in the fall. Yes, there was a spike in cases when the students first came back in the fall, but that got sort of calmed down. And the school financially, obviously like every other school got hit, but apparently the hit at USC wasn't as bad as they were expecting. So he was generally seen with those high marks. The problem really with Bob Caslen was that because he wasn't raised in that academic atmosphere, was some of the niceties, some of the nuances that you need to do in order to woo students, to woo faculty, and more importantly, woo donors, that wasn't really his strong suit. And he was not a very good public speaker. Again, this was someone who had spent 43 years in the Army and not all that time, obviously whining and dining and being part of the academic world. So he struggled with that, and that's a problem, because a lot of the president's job, let alone obviously to run a school, is also to be the face of the school, the voice of the school, the conscience of the school. And he struggled. He did struggle with that, and it came to a fore really in the past couple of months. Number one, the school missed the death of Darla Moore's mother. Darla Moore is the biggest donor that the school's ever had. She was very upset about that and expressed her anger in a letter. Ironically, of course, Clemson had sent recognition for her mother's death. Just for those who may not know, even though Darla Moore's name is associated with USC because the business school is named after her, the education school at Clemson is named after her father, so she's also donated to Clemson. She was very upset, and that was seen as a miss, again, by the administration. And then, of course, the events of a couple weekends ago at commencement, where a couple things happened. Number one, Bob slipped and said University of California instead of obviously South Carolina, which caused a great outcry. And then word came out that two of the paragraphs in his commencement speech were plagiarized from an admiral who actually helped oversee the raid that led to the killing of Osama bin Laden. And with that, sort of a storm kind of brewed. There was just a lot of criticism of the plagiarism, especially considering the standard that the university president would be held to. And in the end, it just sort of became untenable, and Bob Caslen resigned he resigned a week ago, or a little over a week ago.
Okay, so what's next for USC? What do they do next?
Well, what do they do? Well, clearly they need to have a new president, and it's not going to be you or me, Shauna. Sorry, they need to pick one of us. We should need to throw our hats in the ring. But what happened was the board obviously knew that Bob might be leaving, so they called out to who else? Harris Pastides, who is living in Folly Beach mainly. He still comes up to Columbia for a number of things, but he agreed to come back as the interim. Sort of a best of all worlds, I guess, for USC. I mean, you obviously get the old boss back in charge, someone who knows what's going on, and it's a crucial time for USC. It's budget time for USC. They're not going to raise tuition for the second time in 2 years, and they have a lot of crucial decisions to make. And who better, again, to be sort of at the head of the ship than the guy who ran the ship for 11 years. And so he will be officially named the interim president at a meeting tomorrow. And we kind of go from there. And then obviously we search for a new president.
So how long might that search last? And what are the challenges that Pastides after him will have?
Well, yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think it's going to take time. They're starting this search, of course, a lot earlier than the last one in sort of in the academic calendar. Pastides announced his retirement in late fall, and they really didn't get started until about Christmas of 2018. Now, if you think about the idea that really you're talking about the full academic year, probably to look for someone, obviously, do all the interviewing, the vetting, and everything else you need to do, and to have someone in place probably in time for the fall 22 semester. There's going to be a little more time for that, and also at the same time, you're going to have the old president sitting in the Osborne building doing what he does. But in the meantime, Harris has to deal with, as we mentioned, the budget. And the big thing in the budget is that the university is going to have to loan money to the athletic department to cover its COVID shortfalls, which is, USC has taken great pride that it's one of, probably 24 colleges that's able to have a self-sustaining athletic program because it's in the SEC. But COVID hit everybody, and they're going to need a bridge loan essentially to help with some of their financing. In addition, you're going to have the South Campus starting work getting started. You're going to have the efforts to try to finalize the financing for the new medical school complex at Bull Street. You will have an issue, obviously, with what's been going on with the sexual harassment, sexual assault cases that have left sort of the sphere of the university and going into the courts. That's going to be another issue, and just obviously getting the school back to normal after COVID. And again, that was a program that Bob was kind of seeing through. Finally, there's also an online program that Bob had been pushing, an expansion of the online program that is supposed to start in the fall, and again, will have to be examined if that can that can go forward. So a lot of things facing Harris, and of course, a lot of things facing the next president when he or she is appointed. What I would assume is probably next year.
All right, so we got a lot of good questions from readers ahead of this morning. And so let's jump right into those. Richard believes the plagiarism issue was survivable. He asked why General Caslen chose to fall on his sword, and he clearly agrees that he was an excellent leader during COVID. Was it a convenient way out of a job Caslen really didn't like in the first place?
That's a great question. What I would say to that is that the reaction to the University of California remark, and there was sort of this 1-2 punch that happened, that came first, and then the plagiarism allegations came out, and there was just such vitriol, aimed at him on social media, and it had been a tough ride. I mean, from that, going back to the story of his election, his selection. He had always kind of been fighting from behind, going into a headwind. And so, there was a feeling among his family, I understand, and some colleagues of, why are you here? They don't seem to appreciate you. They don't seem to like you. He wanted to stick it through. He thought he could make it through. But this ended up being sort of a final straw. In fact, I'm kind of curious if the University of California incident alone may have precipitated him departing a little earlier than usual, but a little earlier than planned, excuse me. But clearly the plagiarism incident, which of course he fessed up to right away. He had added a couple of paragraphs to his speech late from a book that he apparently gets quotes from, but just forgot to cite the person. So, that said, I think when all that happened, and of course, he resigned at one point. He offered to resign, basically said, look, if you don't have faith in me, he told the board chairman, I'll resign. He was told, sit tight. But a few days later, the cries just kept on coming. And at that point, I think the writing was on the wall.
Okay, so Catherine asked, what can ordinary citizens or alumni do to change the board culture? And talk about the makeup of the board.
Sure. No, and that's again another good question, because another thing in all of this is the board, because they're the ones who decide the direction of the school, and most importantly, decide who the president is and what they want the president to do. So the board there's 20 members of the board. 16 are elected by the legislature from each of the judicial circuits. So where your solicitor is, you've got a representative on the USC board. You also have the governor, an appointment by the governor, the superintendent of education, Molly Spearman, now, and the head of the Alumni Association. So going back to the governor, he doesn't actually come to the meetings. He has a designee who comes to the meetings. In fact, if the governor comes to a meeting, he is the chairman. He automatically becomes the chairman. So I don't think anybody can recall a governor. I think Mark Sanford threatened to come to one meeting, but didn't back in the day. And there was some thought that maybe McMaster might come to one of the meetings for the Caslen vote, but he again stuck with his designee, Dan Adams. So you've got 4 that are essentially appointed. You've got 16 that are elected by the legislature. There's a feeling, there have been board members who, I think with my recollection, that don't hold, I'm having to remember my own statistics, but as I recall, I believe it is 6 members who have been there for at least more than 20 years, including one who's been there for 40 years. There's a feeling that maybe some of them have been on the board too long, and is there term limits that need to be put in place? There's a feeling from the last search of whether there was sort of attention being paid to what the university community wanted, what the university community needed versus what the board thought was the best idea. That's, so the way to affect the board is the 16 members, and to talk to your legislators about if somebody is running against a sitting board member, to say, hey, unless so-and-so does things that I prefer, maybe you should consider new blood. That would be the biggest thing is the legislature, because that's where most of them get voted. And again, both the House and the Senate vote for them, all 170 members of the General Assembly. So go to your senator, go to your representative, and tell them what you think if you have an issue with the board.
All right. Well, Tara asks, will there be a pool of diverse candidates? Specifically, will there be at least one candidate of color in the top 2 finalists? What's your prediction?
Sure. What's my prediction? My prediction is, again, Bob Caslen resigned a week ago. So I can't put in the crystal ball. But let's talk about the last search, and then I think the lessons from the last search. So that's a good question. So the last search, essentially, the biggest criticism was the lack of women. We had heard that I think there was only one woman among the semifinalists, and she pulled out because she ended up getting a job at another university. And there were no women among the finalists, and one person of color among the 4 finalists. And that was, again, Bill Tate, the provost, who was actually seen as a Caslen successor. But the week before the commencement, Bill Tate became the president at LSU, at Louisiana State. So Bill Tate's already on his way to Baton. Well, he's mentally, I guess, on the way to Baton Rouge, even though he might be physically still in Columbia. And I'm sure he's still working hard for the folks in Columbia. I don't mean to imply anything, but obviously, Bill's got the next step ahead of him. And so there was at least a person of color representation in the finalists. Now they usually do the top four. They usually do 4 finalists. They may do fewer this time. There's a feeling that maybe that 4 is too many. So they might do 1, they might do 2, they might do 3. Again, I think there's going to be representation on there, especially with a woman, after the criticism they received the last time for not having a woman. So I think there will be a diverse choice, a diverse group of finalists. I think that's going to be a mandate for the search committee.
All right. And in terms of finalists, Michael asked, what's the likelihood the next president will be a USC graduate or at least a South Carolina native? And is there anything South Carolinians can do to promote that possibility?
Well, there you go. See, Shauna, you basically were raised in South Carolina, so there you go. That could be you. I don't quite count. The Philadelphia boy doesn't quite count, though. Of course, I did marry into the Gamecock family with my wife, but obviously that makes a lot of sense. I'm married with my wife. There you go. But you know what I'm saying. But that said, I think they're going to look for the best person, and if that person is from the outside, it's from the outside. If it's somebody from South Carolina, it'll be somebody from South Carolina. And of course, I think one of the issues it's going to be is if it ends up being, say, a politician or a former politician, there's going to be a sort of a cry of foul of, well, is this person, again, just like Caslen, have sort of the academic bona fides that we expect. We expect someone with a doctorate. We expect someone who's done research. We expect someone who understands the culture here. And if you're coming from the military, or you're coming from politics, or you're coming from the boardroom, there might be some concern that this is someone who doesn't understand it, and we just went through that.
Okay. Well, now we have a series of questions about McMaster, kind of going back to the hiring, the beginning. Becky asked, why was Caslen McMaster's choice, and what was the behind the scenes thinking in that happening?
And again, and there were, I did understand that we got a number of questions concerning McMaster, and that was sort of the big headline. So let me explain about the governor's role. Again, South Carolina has the governor on the board of most public institutions. He is not on Clemson, because Clemson was founded differently with lifetime board members. But at places like Winthrop and at USC, at College of Charleston, he is on the board and would actually be the chairman of the boards if he showed up at meetings. Again, he names a designee, so he gets 2 appointments on the USC board in this case, and on other boards as well. So the way he explained it is that he had not met Caslen, he didn't know him, but he felt like Caslen got treated unfairly when they passed him over on the first vote in 2019. Reached out to Caslen, then he decided to reach out to the trustees and said, look, let's vote on Caslen and give him a fair shake. He gets a job, he gets a job. If he doesn't, he doesn't, but let's give the man a fair shake. That was seen as political meddling by USC's accreditors. Now, if Henry McMaster was next to me, or somebody from his staff's next to me, they would say, wait a minute, he's a board member. That's no different than a board member lobbying another board member saying, I like person A better than person B, but he's still the governor. As I said, he's not sort of a full-time member of the board himself. He appoints a designee, Dan Adams. And so, it was sort of seen as, was outside influence playing a role in all of this. The accreditors did not sanction the university, but did ask the university to remake the bylaws for the board, which they did. And eventually the accreditor said, looks good to us, and moved along. So, got a bit of a wrist slap, a little bit of a scare, but again, the university apparently did the right things to make them happy. That said, there's nothing to prevent McMaster from being involved again, either indirectly or directly. He'll say, if he wants to get involved, that I am a board member and I'm allowed to have a say, that I prefer Shaunna Adcox over Andy Shain to be the president. That's going to be his call. But again, I would expect the complaints would go to the accreditors and we'd go through this process again. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it'll be a little, it won't be as blatant and this time around, but again, there's nothing to prevent the governor from being involved in this. And again, politics is always going to be involved in this. 16 of the 20 board members are elected by the lawmakers, and they have opinions too.
And off readers' questions for a minute, talk about what McMaster has said after the resignation and what sort of communication there was on the back end.
Sure. McMaster said he spoke with Caslen, with Bob after the plagiarism incident was learned, and he was still sort of in limbo. And then after he resigned, and he supported him. He said, he was a good president. He worked to try to get win more military work, more cybersecurity work for USC. He obviously got them through the COVID. Said he said he was a good man and he did a good job. So he's continues to back Caslen, but obviously back the decision he made, and it's not much of a surprise. That's the governor obviously usually sticks with his friends and sticks with his choices.
Well, speaking of friends, Robert asks if Caslen was a personal friend of him, of McMaster, or perhaps any of the board members before all this started going.
I've not found any evidence of it. And then again, another rumor out there is that Trump pushed him because he was at one point he was on the short list to be national security advisor. Lindsay pushed him. We found no evidence of any of that overtly. Obviously if things happen back channel, they happen back channel, but we didn't even really hear too much about that. I think Bob's name came up from the search firm. When he left West Point, he was at the University of Central Florida helping basically as a crisis manager. They were going through a financial crisis after I think there was some financial shenanigans, and he was brought in to help kind of clean things up and help with protocols. So I think his name, I think he was reached out and said, hey, we've got a couple of openings. Would you be interested? And when his name came in, everybody instantly fell in love with him. I mean, essentially it was, as I said, based on what the board wanted at the time, which was somebody different than Harris. He was seen as a big win, and he got pushed very hard.
And what have legislators said following the California, South Carolina, and plagiarism? Talk about what they said at the podium, and perhaps what they said behind the scenes.
I think there was some support. There was obviously a big argument on the Senate floor, and you covered that. Some people saying that essentially we should be supportive of him, that this was a simple mistake, and the board didn't know what they were, essentially sometimes don't know what you're getting when you hire someone. But at the same time, there are legislators that want to remake the board, and there has been a bill reintroduced. This bill was first introduced back in 2019 after the first search, but the COVID kind of swept it away. But to shrink the size of the board, change the way the board is put together, and most importantly, would clean the slate, take all the current members off. If they want their jobs, they'd have to basically reapply again.
Okay.
And also, I do want to remind people too, you can ask questions in the Q&A section as well. We can probably get to some of those as well.
I'll give a few minutes for that. Talk about what the bill would do that would actually shrink that board, and why that would be seen as a good thing. Well, how that compares to other boards.
Sure. USC has one of the largest boards in the state. I think College of Charleston's the only other one that has 20 members. There's a feeling that there's just too many people. The real issue is they want to be able to eliminate everybody who's on the board now and sort of starts from scratch. But if you have a smaller board, you might have better decision making is the feeling. Really, it's just there are just a lot of people right now mad at USC and want to take it out on the board, and this is just their way of doing it. Come January, because for those who don't know, the regular session ended earlier this month. And so this bill isn't going to be taken up until January. And by then we might have a new president. By then the Gamecocks might have won the SEC. I have no idea. There may be things that just have changed that will change the temperature, or there may be things that might be raising it. And it's one of the first bills out of the chute in the 2022 session.
And have faculty, the folks who didn't want Caslen to begin with, what have they been saying, or have they been vocal at all?
There was one faculty group that came out that basically said it's time for a change, and because again of the idea of the plagiarism, that was sort of a line that you can't come back from. The faculty senate itself has not come out with a statement. By the time the faculty senate was meeting, they were expecting to meet while Bob was still president, but by the time they met, he was gone. So I think they're more or less wanting to just make sure that the search is sort of goes in the right direction and doesn't repeat the 2019. And as a reminder, real quick, the composition of the search committee is going to be 8 trustees, all of whom are the 8 trustees who are 8 from the group, from the 16 that are elected by the legislature, the 5 faculty senate chairmen and chairwomen from the various campuses, Columbia, Beaufort, Aiken, Upstate, and then those representing the 2-year colleges, and then the student body president is also going to be on the search committee, and that's then actually the trustees on the search committee will be selected at tomorrow's meeting. So yeah, I do see some questions in the Q&A basket there. So if we wanted to grab some of those. If you're not seeing it, if you don't mind, Sean, I might go ahead and just ask one of them.
I'm not actually seeing that. Apparently, I'm not looking in the right place.
Oh, it's quite all right. It's, Zoom is Zoom, and then we're hopefully getting out of practice now that we're getting back together again. But we have someone who's anonymous who asks, do you think the board will follow the rules this time around the presidential suit, and do you think they'll be more transparent? And I think so. They've pledged that. They've changed the rules since they've done it before. They even have a rule that says if you're approached by someone on the from the outside trying to pressure you, you're supposed to tell the search committee chairman or woman that it's happened, and they're supposed to tell the board chairman, who is Dorn Smith, so that they are aware of these things. So that's what's different. I see I have a question here also. So why did Chastides retire in the first place? I think the issue, there's a lot of talk about the fact that USC was involved in the State House probe that involved the Richard Quinn and Associates. USC was a client of Richard Quinn and Associates, and Pastides was called before the grand jury to discuss the influence that the firm had, that Richard had. USC was not directly, sanctioned in any way as a result of it, but it happened around the same time, so there was always a lot of talk about it. But at the same time, Harris had been the president for 11 years. Usually, the presidents last 5-6 years. So wasn't surprised about the timing. He also said, I'm going to leave before I run out of energy. And I think he left on at least as far as he was concerned, on the right amount, on the right note. And also he had accomplished a number of his projects. But again, the questions about the school's involvement in that probe certainly came up at the same time. So that's fine. I mean, that's the way it is.
All right. So I've figured out how to do this.
Great.
We have a reader asking, or listener, are those serving on the 2019 search committee prohibited from serving on this search? No, I mean, and there's likely to be. The turnover on the board has been minimal at this point. So it's very likely you're going to have some people from the 2019 search, some who will be on it. But it also could be, there is always enough new people, I guess you could imagine. But I think the lessons have been learned from 2019. You would think that hopefully they'll follow through. So. All right, and a listener says, running a large institution really is running a large corporation. Why is having a PhD considered that critical? Oh, okay, that's a good point. Again, I think it's been part of the history of and it's the expectation that, again, you've been through the system, so to speak, that you understand what it takes to be a student, be a faculty member at the university. You're not just coming straight from the outside where you made cars or you ran a logistics firm, that kind of thing. That universities are sort of a different animal, and so that you can speak the language and understand what's happening.
that's the feeling. Now, again, there have been successful presidents who come from unconventional backgrounds. People will point to Mitch Daniels at Purdue, for instance, who was a politician. But again, that's what most folks consider important.
All right, I'll close with this. What's the likelihood that Pastides will actually become the next president and not just interim?
That's an interesting question. I don't think he will become, I doubt he will become the next president. He's 67. I think was looking forward to retirement, had built a home in Folly. And so my hunch, if I'm going to take a guess, and we can come back to this like in a year or two, is that Harris Pastides definitely stays through the academic year, because I think it's going to take the next academic year to find and get a new president. But if they don't get a pool they like, they ask him to stay another year. So he stays maybe 2 years. And I'd be interested to see if he'd be willing to do that so that they get the best candidate, get the right candidate. One of the things we're hearing is that post-COVID, there are going to be a lot of openings at colleges. You have to wonder if there's going to be a hefty competition for USC to find the right folks at this point.
All right. Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And this will be available on YouTube for everyone to watch, as well as emailed to you. You can support our work by signing up for any of our free newsletters, and we have a lot of them. I actually write the political newsletter tomorrow. It goes out at 8:30 a.m. every day. But go to postandcourier.com/Columbia/newsletter-sign up. But if you really want to support us with our ability to continue informing you and the rest of our communities around South Carolina, please subscribe if you don't already. If you do, thank you very much. If you don't, please consider going to postandcourier.com/subscribe. Have a happy, wonderful rest of your day and happy early weekend.
Cheers.
I'm grateful that our company prides good journalism and that they allow us to do what we need to do instead of cutting back like many papers are in our industry. Knowledge is power, and I hope to empower our readers to contact their legislators, be involved in their state government. I believe our readers need to know whatever the issue is of interest to individual readers.